King's Cross is a church committed to fully enjoy and share with others the life, grace, and restoration that can only be found in Jesus. If you are unable to visit us on Sunday mornings, you can learn more about King's Cross at kingscrossva.org.
Our passage this morning comes from 2 Chronicles, chapter 12, verses 1 through 9. When the rule of Rehoboam was established and he was strong, he abandoned the law of the Lord and all Israel with him. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, because he had been unfaithful to the Lord, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem with 1,200 chariots and 60,000 horsemen. And the people were without number who came with him from Egypt, Libyans, Sukkiim, and Ethiopians. And he took the fortified cities of Judah and came as far as Jerusalem. Then Shemaiah the prophet came to Rehoboam and to the princes of Judah who had gathered at Jerusalem because of Shishak and said to them, "Thus says the Lord, you abandoned me, so I have abandoned you to the hand of Shishak." Then the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves and said, "The Lord is righteous." When the Lord saw that they had humbled themselves, the word of the Lord came to Shemaiah. "They have humbled themselves. I will not destroy them, but I will grant them some deliverance, and my wrath shall not be poured out on Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak. Nevertheless, they shall be servants to him, that they may know my service and the service of the kingdoms of the countries." So Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took away everything. This is the word of the Lord. Well, I want you to notice straight away that as we look at yet another king, by the way, with a difficult to pronounce name, I want you to know the king last week was a king by the name of Jeroboam. And this king's name is Rehoboam. I suggested that you think about the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, the northern called Israel and the southern called Judah, that you think about them in alphabetical order, at least for the time being. Jeroboam is the guy in the north, and Rehoboam, he is the guy in the south. Now, I want us to consider as well that not only are these parallel kingdoms, but they're parallel kingdoms in which the kings have parallel responsibilities. They must establish their rule. And both of these kingdoms, they begin at the same time, that of the north and that of the south. And the kings themselves are of similar ages, in their 40s. And the kings themselves have quite a bit of work to do. Now, that king who's in the north, Jeroboam, this king is starting from scratch. This king is a king of 10 tribes, and these 10 tribes used to be with David first and then David's son Solomon. Jeroboam's got quite a bit of work. And as you recall from last week, Jeroboam approached that work by, inventing, creating a new kind of religion that would be practiced in his new kingdom of Israel, which is really just 10 of the 12 tribes. He's starting something new, but he still has to establish his authority. And the king in the south perhaps doesn't have to go quite back to scratch. Rehoboam in the south, he's the legitimate son of King Solomon. And in many ways, what Rehoboam is doing is he's just continuing what was begun by David and what was begun by Solomon. Things deteriorated, of course, but he is more continuing, whereas Jeroboam is inventing. Two kingdoms in parallel, more or less beginning at the same time. And they're in a race, aren't they? Who's going to be able to establish the strongest kingdom, the kingdom that is most likely to last longest? Which will it be? Think of those games where the horses are racing against each other, arcade games from like the 50s or 60s or something. These two horses, there they go. They're off at it. But I want us to think about how someone wins in the kingdom of God. C.S. Lewis, in his lectures that ultimately became Mere Christianity, used an illustration that I know is familiar with some of you here, but I'm going to use it anyway. It was an illustration of two students doing a math problem. And both students are working tirelessly away to get to the right answer. And C.S. Lewis said that if there's an error anywhere in the problem, then whatever that answer is going to be incorrect. And there's a strange dynamic that would happen if both of the students made an error in solving the math problem. But if one of those students actually stopped and turned around and went backwards in order to catch the error, to correct the error. And in that particular snapshot, the student who ultimately is going to win is the student who in that punctiliar moment is going backwards. Which of these two kings are going to win? Will it be Jeroboam in the north or Rehoboam in the south? And really, what this passage has for us is this principle that is very important to that question. And the principle is this, is that God offers strength to those who are weak. And this is a principle that has gospel significance. A Christian, you are saved because you are weak. And as you grow as a Christian, you actually grow in your weakness. You understand yourself to be needier than ever. You understand yourself to be a sinner who needs grace. You understand yourself as someone who is strong only in their weakness. And that's what we're learning from these two kings, especially in the case of our king this morning, King Rehoboam. God offers strength to those who are weak. And I want to just say two things about Rehoboam. The first thing is really focused on the first verse of our passage. And then the second thing I wish to say is about all of the rest of the passage. But the first is this. When he was strong, he walked away. You see verse 1. May I just read it to you? When the rule of Rehoboam was established and he was strong, you see that, he abandoned the law of the Lord and all Israel with him. And do you think verse 1 is a good sentence or a bad sentence? It's a sentence that tells us that Rehoboam reached a point in which he was unshakable and strong. That's what the word established means, unshakable. And he was strong, but at the same time, he abandoned, and that word abandon shows up again in our passage. Just think about this for a moment. Rehoboam reached a certain point in his life where he felt as though he didn't need God anymore, but that's not something that you need to be a Christian in order to understand. Isn't it true that as we mature and as we grow as human beings, the kinds of things that we needed when we were children, we no longer need those anymore? Perhaps the silliest illustration is one of learning how to ride a bike. And you arrive at a point such that you're not a 30-year-old riding with training wheels. The training wheels are gone. You don't need those anymore. You move on. No more training wheels. We've been weaned, so to speak. It is not hard to imagine that we need to get to a certain point of maturity in which we don't need those things that we once needed in the past. But think about this. Is it possible to, even in maturity, in strength, to still need those things that you had when you were, immature and weak? I want to suggest to you that too makes sense. You do not have to be a Christian in order to have an image of that in your head, an image of someone who is clearly mature, clearly strong, while at the same time relying upon that thing that they needed when they were less strong. Let me just give you the illustration of a notable figure, someone who clearly has arrived, an Olympic athlete, a famous surgeon, a CEO of one of the largest companies, someone who has clearly arrived. Don't we appreciate when a person like that, who seems to be fully strong, fully mature, fully established, don't we admire a person like that who remembers their mentor, who remembers the people that invested in their lives such that they would learn how to be what they are in the present? We admire people like that. People who seem to have it all. There's no way in their industry or in their specialization to go any higher. And yet, what do? They look backwards and they think about those people who really got them where they are today. That's not hard to imagine at all. It's also not hard to imagine this. That same person saying, not only do I recall those individuals who helped me way back then when I was so foolish and knew nothing, those same individuals help me today. I call my mentor every month, every couple of months, and check with their wisdom, their knowledge, and their experience. You see, it actually is possible to imagine someone who, in their strength, still recognizing that they are weak. And they continue to need those people who helped them when they were far weaker than they are now. In fact, the larger the mentor, the helper, the assistant, the more significant that individual is in their lives, well, then it just becomes a wonderful image. This notable person who continues to reflect upon the person that went before them and continues to need that person in their day-to-day activities, that's someone I will follow. Do you know who that mentor was for Rehoboam? Right in our passage, there's so much in this one verse. He abandoned the law of the Lord. Rehoboam had nothing short of the law of the Lord as his, so to speak, mentor. And this mentor got him to a certain place in life. And we would have loved to have heard that Rehoboam is still developing that relationship with that mentor called the law of the Lord. But no, he has reached a point in his life in which he's established and he's strong, and he cast the mentor aside. Friends, we do not need to be a Christian in order to appreciate that imagery. And that imagery is so important to understand what's happening in Rehoboam's life. You know, we see a little bit of a seed of this in his life already. You see, 5 years ago, the northern tribes, they had asked for Rehoboam to be compassionate, to be gentle. The northern tribes 5 years ago, they knew that Rehoboam, if he was like Solomon, was going to make their lives miserable, because that's what Solomon did. He taxed them heavily and he forced their people in labor. And they begged Rehoboam, would you please be more lenient than your father? And we know what Rehoboam did. Rehoboam said to those very people, I shall be worse to you than my father was. That is how Jeroboam gets a kingdom. The northern tribe was rejected by Rehoboam. Rehoboam had no mercy or compassion for them. In fact, Rehoboam says this, I'll be established and strong by being even worse than my dad. We could have seen that 5 years ago, that this is the kind of man who wants to establish himself by his own strength. And those northern tribes, they left him, rebelled against him, and started something new. We might ask this question, by the way. Again, we're still in verse 1. I understand that. But when you look at verse 1, are you tempted to ask, how is it then that he becomes established and strong? When you look at 2 Chronicles, you can go back up to 2 Chronicles chapter 11, and the author there tells us something. But can I just interject real quickly here that 1 and 2 kings in the Bible 1 and 2 Kings, those books of the Bible, those are about the northern kings and the southern kings together. And 1 and 2 Kings is difficult to read because it goes back and forth a lot. This king was a king in the south, this king or in the north, this king was a king in the south, and it goes back and forth. 1 and 2 Chronicles doesn't do that. 1 and 2 Chronicles is written from the perspective of Judah, that southern kingdom. And so with 1 and 2 Chronicles, you just get that southern kingdom. And let me encourage you that if you're just trying to get a handle on this part of Israel's history, sit down and just read 1 and 2 Chronicles. Where we are right now is we're at 2 Chronicles chapter 11, because there we know how Rehoboam is strengthened and established. In 2 Chronicles 11, we read that those priests and the Levites who were in Israel presented themselves to Rehoboam. What Jeroboam did in the law of God, and the Levites, the spiritual people, the priests, the followers of the law of God, and Jeroboam kicked them all out. Well, they go south into Rehoboam's kingdom. And they actually make Rehoboam's kingdom stronger. It's the spiritual people coming in from the north, having been disinherited of the cities of the Levites. And they go south. And 2 Chronicles 11 is this wonderful story that says that all of these people who had set their hearts to seek the Lord of God in Israel, they came south. There was a population of people, Levites, and then people who were faithful to the ministry of the Levites, they come south and they call Judah their home. And Rehoboam is that king. That's how Rehoboam is established. 2 Chronicles 11:11 could not be clearer. They strengthened the kingdom of Judah and for 3 years made Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, secure. Friends, the establishment, the strength, the security of Rehoboam is because of the church. The priests in the north, they make their way south. His strength literally comes from the law of the Lord. That is literally where he finds his strength. And it lasted for 3 years, and then he abandons the Lord. And we're not told why exactly he abandoned, but it's significant, isn't it? Look at verse 1 again. Not only was it just King Rehoboam that abandoned the Lord, but all of Israel with him. They're done. They've had it. They walk away. We're not told exactly how it happened. But if you go back to that notable figure, that figure who has achieved everything in their specialization and now they reject their mentor, it might be hard to tell why they reject that mentor. And so it's hard to tell why exactly King Rehoboam and all the people abandoned God in such a short period of time. And maybe I have two suggestions. We're just not told explicitly. One has to do with personal holiness. Rehoboam lived a life that was out of accord with God's will. And just personal holiness. Rehoboam, he saw his dad, King Solomon. 40-year reign. Rehoboam is 41 years old. He saw all of Dad's reign, and he also saw Dad's deterioration. And Rehoboam, he picks up where Dad left off. And we're given more of a hint in that when we're told that Rehoboam has already begun taking multiple wives. There's going to be 18. And he's already taken up multiple mistresses. There's going to be 60 of those. And he's already trying to secure his reign through children, 28 sons and 60 daughters ultimately. And he takes these children, ultimately he will take these children and spread them out around his territory, calling all of them princes and princesses in order to secure his authority. We can already tell that this Rehoboam is a planner for his own purposes. We can tell that. It has something to do with personal holiness, and he abandons the Lord who strengthened and established him. It also has something to do with worship. Jeroboam has replaced the worship practices, whereas Rehoboam has ignored the worship practices. Jeroboam, he just took all of the Old Testament and scooted it aside, and he creates a new religion. But If that's a counterfeit religion, the authentic religion that Rehoboam has, he simply ignored that. It has something to do with personal holiness and something to do with worship. But in his strength, he abandons God. He walks away. And all of the remaining portion of this passage is about that a man could get to a place of strength and establishment and yet still abandon the Lord. Verse 1 tells us that when he was strong, he walked away. But then we see something else, beginning in verse 2. When he was weak, he stayed. When he was strong, he walked away. But when he was weak, he stayed. Would you just think about that as you go off into your Sunday afternoon? When he was strong, he walked away, and when he was weak, he stayed. What happens in verses 2 through 12 is really a story about Egypt. Shishak is the pharaoh of Egypt. He's starting a new dynasty, but he's still a long ways away, 260 miles. I mean, we're talking about the kind of journey that's going to take at least a month. 70,000 men, chariots, horses. And we're told that he comes without number, a lot of people. We're told that there are Libyans. The Pharaoh, he's a Libyan, so that must mean his family members, Libyans, are coming. Sukkiim and Ethiopians. This is likely a reference to those who are not part of Egypt, but they're hired mercenaries. It is a crowd for blood. And they make this trip. When Rehoboam was weak, he actually stayed, and here we're seeing why he's weak. And I want to describe these circumstances in a number of ways. I mean, what is happening here? We have an entire nation that seems to be energized to travel so far north at such great inconvenience for two nations that are 5 years old. They're brand new. Why is this happening? Well, there's some historical circumstances, and then there's some spiritual circumstances. The historical circumstances are this. Egypt's respect for Solomon, Rehoboam's dad, is over. It's over. There was a time where Egypt respected King Solomon, daughter of a pharaoh. That very early in his kingship, King Solomon, he married the daughter of a pharaoh. And that wasn't this pharaoh. It was at least two pharaohs back. Maybe just one pharaoh. Maybe this pharaoh's father. But affection for Israel is done. Egypt has no love. Egypt now wants to take over. Whatever Solomon had, Egypt wants. You see, there was an arrangement that King Solomon had by marrying the Pharaoh's daughter, but now there's a new kind of arrangement. Let me tell you, again, this is all the historical circumstance. Here's what's beginning to happen. Jeroboam is not part of the royal family. That king in the north, do you remember, he was a servant of Solomon, and he rebelled against Solomon. And where did he go for safety? He went to Egypt. And who kept him safe in Egypt? This guy. Shishak kept him safe in Egypt. Jeroboam has a fat Rolodex with regards to things in Egypt. And Shishak is coming. Why do you think Shishak is coming? You know, archaeologists who have no interest in Jesus at all, no interest in Christian thought or doctrine, archaeologists tell us that it's very likely that Shishak had a relationship with Jeroboam that made this adventure, called an expedition, possible. Jeroboam, he lived in Egypt for many years, befriended Shishak. And we actually find that there's an inscription that archaeologists take us to that's called the Karnak inscription. And it tells about this very expedition. Why in the world was Shishak travel 260 miles north for little bitty Israel and little bitty Judah? And in that inscription, archaeologists say there are three groups of cities that he describes by going on this expedition. Shishak, in this inscription of Karnak, you can find it online. He talks about the kinds of cities that he gained by going on this expedition. And let me explain to you the cities. The first kinds of cities that Shishak describes are the cities of Judah. You see them referenced in our own passage this morning, verse 4. Those fortified cities, they're in the Karnak inscription. Shishak was pleased to have gained these fortress cities in Judah. But then there's another group of city names, and those are city names that are south of Judah, almost like they're cities along the way. But there's a third grouping of cities, and these are not cities that are in Judah. These are cities that are in Israel, in the north. Again, friends, we're talking about the Karnak inscription. Archaeologists take us to this very wall and tell us the cities that Shishak was excited to have gained by this expedition. And the third group of city names that he lists are the Levitical cities in Israel, the very cities that have been vacated by Jeroboam. Took those cities from the Levites, scared the Levites south and anyone who agreed with the worship of the Levites. And those very cities appear carved upon that wall at the temple of Karnak. Isn't that interesting? Jeroboam has sold out Rehoboam. Jeroboam has invited Egypt to come north. How remarkable is that? Not only are those Levitical cities done away with and replaced by Bethel and Dan, and the temple is replaced with 2 calves, and the people, the priests, are replaced with priests that he assigns. And on top of all of that, he gives the Levitical cities to the Pharaoh of Egypt and invites Egypt north. How astounding. You see, there's some historical circumstances for what's happening in the port. And so Shishak, a man who was strong and established but abandoned the Lord. And so Shishak and 70,000 people come into the city of Jerusalem. See how evocative verse 9 is. So Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took away everything, and not a human being died, friends. He just walks into the city and takes what he wants. Now, if you're growing up in this time, how magnificent of an experience would that be for you? The population of Jerusalem is, if it's over 100,000, not by much, surely less. 70,000 foreigners walk into your city and they take whatever they want. That would mark you. That would terrify you. You would be jittery for the rest of your life. When is it going to happen again? And in fact, our passage says, doesn't it, that Judah remained in service of Egypt. It could happen in any moment. It marks you. Those are the historical circumstances of Shishak coming to Judah. But Rehoboam knows that there are spiritual circumstances that are actually more pressing than that. As Shemaiah the prophet, an unknown prophet, and surely he's not a Levite, he says in verse 5 that you have abandoned the Lord, and so the Lord has abandoned you. You see, the historical circumstances are the guy in the north, Jeroboam, selling out the guy in the south, but the spiritual circumstances are the judgment of God. Is God just in this judgment? He absolutely is. Rehoboam was made strong and established. Why? Because of God's good grace. The law of the Lord, the lives of the Levites and those who follow the Levites. God was gracious and he gave just then merely the Levite Rehoboam, and he established Rehoboam. God is even more gracious than merely the Levites. God gave to Rehoboam the heritage of Solomon and the heritage of David. Yes, God is just. He established him in his grace, and yet he still walked away, Rehoboam did. The spiritual circumstances in our passage, praise be to God, continue, don't they? Because what does Rehoboam do? Rehoboam humbles himself. There's something about God's grace that he understands. There's a correction point in his life. Everything that I had that was my strength came from the grace of God. And they humble themselves. And the humility, friends, it's not extensive, is it? Look at verse 6. The princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves. That's great, but what about the rest of the people? Maybe the rest of the people didn't humble themselves. But Rehoboam and the princes of Israel did. And when we ask how this humility was expressed, we have to go back to as we were discerning how the abandonment was expressed. The abandonment was a lack of personal holiness and a lack of worship, and we have to assume that that's what the humility shows. It shows a personal holiness, and it shows a heart of worship. But Scripture sure isn't explicit. We don't know exactly how they humbled themselves, but we know that their humility was real. God saw that they humbled themselves. And the results are remarkable, aren't they? Shemaiah says in verse 7, I will grant them some deliverance, and oh my, any deliverance would be wonderful after 70,000 people walking into our city. I will grant them some deliverance, but nevertheless, says verse 8, they shall always be servants to Egypt, that they might know my service and the service of the kingdoms of the countries. There's something about that service, humbleness, dependence that is important to the people that wasn't before. Before, they didn't think they needed to be dependent, and now they do. You see, there's two realities here before we conclude. One reality is that, praise be to God, they're saved from God's judgment. But at the same time, they remain in need of His grace. Do you see both of those realities? They're saved from God's judgment, but they still need His grace. And I want to charge us to see that that is the definition of the Christian life. In Christ Jesus, we are no longer condemned. But as Christian people, we need His grace moment by moment by moment. That's the reality of the Christian life. And it's being described here in the life of Rehoboam. You see, he sees that he's saved and at the same time still needy. Do you think that Rehoboam sees anything about Jesus in this? I'm not sure that he does. In this reality, is he thinking about God's anointed one? I'm just not sure that he is, but maybe he is. But here's something I am sure of. The book of Chronicles was written later than the books of Kings. The books of Chronicles were written when Jerusalem was nothing. The book of Chronicles is written as a reflection upon a history that is so long gone. These people know that they have no nation. The people who are reading this very passage, they understand that we've lost everything. Those people are 19 kings after Rehoboam, and they see that everything was a complete and total failure. There is no more Jerusalem, and the land is in the hand of the Persians. They know that the story is a dark story indeed. And what does 2 Chronicles 12 tell them? 2 Chronicles 12 tells them that the failure was abandoning the one true God, and that the failure was a refusal to humble him or humble himself. Let's think about that for a moment. You're standing in a pile of rubble. There's nothing standing as far as the eye can see. And you know that you are a servant to a kingdom far, far away. Your breath is controlled, so to speak. And God says all of this happened because they abandoned the one true God. All of this happened through a failure to be humble. And the music that they begin to hear is a music that says your humility matters. Your smallness matters. Your repentance matters. Your confession of sin, it matters. And in that particular moment, wouldn't they be longing for a new king? A humble king, a meek king, a holy and worshipful king. The kind of king who would be better than King Rehoboam, the king who refused to be humble and was unable to keep us safe. We want a king who doesn't refuse to be humble and is able to keep us safe. And the literature of the prophets in that very moment, those who are reading this passage that we just read, they would have with them as well the works of the prophets. And they would yearn for not merely a humble king, but a king born of a virgin from an insignificant village, riding back into the city of Jerusalem on a donkey. That's the prophetic literature written during the time, read during the time of this very passage. And Rehoboam didn't see the anointed, but the audience of this passage most certainly would. You see, God provides strength, and we offer merely weakness. God established Rehoboam, strengthened Rehoboam. This is all in God's grace, but Rehoboam, he abandoned God and he pursued himself. And God judges Rehoboam, but not to destroy him. God judges him to establish and strengthen him. Christian, that's the kind of people we are. We are the kind of people who have been strengthened by God out of his grace. And he has done this not because we are so special. He has done this because our King is so special. And we have a perfect King, and he has come to establish that strength. And this perfect King is full of compassion. And brothers and sisters, we are a people that need that compassion. Our hearts are ever tempted, aren't they, to abandon? That's the lesson of Rehoboam. Our hearts are always bent towards running away. But the king that we have is the kind of king that is perfect and holy and meek. And even amidst that temptation to run away, to abandon, this king, he holds us close, brings us under his wings, and protects us. This is the kind of king that we have in Jesus. He can do these two things, Christian. He can make you eternally safe, and he can do that while you are a sinner. He can make you eternally safe and do that while today you are here this morning as a sinner in need of grace. One day that king will come and sin will be no more, and the risk of abandonment or the temptation to run away as far as we can, it'll be no more. But for now, you have a king who has both saved you and present with you. If you're here this morning and you're not a believer, this is a very hard message for Christians to actually embrace, because we look at ourselves as so special, having been saved, that we are not sinners anymore, and we're afraid to talk about our own sin with brothers and sisters. That is a real Christian thing. And if you're here and you're not a Christian, I just want to confess that to you in advance. This is what Christian people are like. And this is why we have this glorious story of Rehoboam, to remind us of that. We are saved and yet still need his grace, because God provides strength to the weak. Would you join me in prayer?